Most people think Malaysia's strength comes from its land, its palm oil, its industries, and its booming cities. But Malaysia's true power lies in the water, because almost everything the country trades, fuels, or consumes passes through one single narrow channel, the Strait of Malacca. It's one of the busiest waterways on Earth, a global artery that connects Asia to the world, and many believe Malaysia owns it. But here's the twist. The Strait of Malacca isn't really Malaysia's. In fact, this lifeline, the one that keeps Malaysia's economy breathing, is shared, controlled, and even watched by others. Yet, without it, Malaysia's economy could collapse within days. And that's what makes this story so fascinating and so fragile. In this video, we'll uncover why Malaysia depends so heavily on this single strait, who actually controls it behind the scenes, and what might happen if one day that control slips away. Because the Strait of Malacca may carry Malaysia's fortune, but it could also be the reason it falls. Let's dive in. Every day, thousands of ships glide silently past Malaysia's western coastline. Massive tankers, container giants, and cargo vessels stacked like floating skyscrapers. They move in perfect rhythm, threading through the narrow blue ribbon that separates Malaysia from Indonesia. This is the Strait of Malacca, just 890 kilometers long, but one of the most critical trade arteries in the modern world. From the deck of any vessel, it may look like just another sea route. But for Malaysia, this strait isn't just water, it's survival. Nearly 80% of Malaysia's trade flows through this channel. Every barrel of imported oil, every exported microchip, every shipment of palm oil all pass through these same waters. Without it, Malaysia's economy would choke before it could even protest. To understand how vital it is, look at Malaysia's ports. Port Klang on the west coast has become one of the busiest in the world, a humming nexus of cranes, containers, and commerce. Each day, ships from China, the Middle East, and Europe dock here to offload goods or refuel before continuing their journey. Then there is Penang Port, once a colonial outpost, now reborn as a modern logistics hub. Together, these ports thrive not because Malaysia is at the center of global trade, but because the Strait of Malacca puts it there. Economically, Malaysia's lifeblood doesn't flow through highways or railways, it flows through salt water. The strait acts like a giant artery, pumping wealth, energy, and opportunity through the nation. And like any artery, it carries a silent warning. Block it, and the whole system collapses. That's why even a single disruption, a piracy attack, a collision, or a military standoff sends ripples of anxiety through Kuala Lumpur. When tankers slow down here, factories slow down inland. When cargo routes shift, Malaysia's revenues shift with them. The country's prosperity is literally anchored in this narrow passage of sea. But here's the irony. The ships that fuel Malaysia's economy don't stop because Malaysia commands them. They move because global trade demands it. And the deeper you look, the more you realize something unsettling. The very strait that sustains Malaysia's wealth isn't fully theirs. From above, the Strait of Malacca looks deceptively simple, a long, thin stretch of blue separating Malaysia's west coast from the islands of Indonesia. But zoom in and the truth becomes clear. This lifeline doesn't truly belong to Malaysia. It's shared, divided, and delicately balanced among three nations: Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. The geography is a trap disguised as a gift. While Malaysia sits proudly along the northern edge, much of the deep navigational channel, the part that giant ships actually use, runs closer to Indonesia's Sumatra. On paper, Malaysia owns part of the coastline. In reality, the most critical shipping lanes hug someone else's shore. Then there's Singapore, a city-state so small it barely appears on the map. Yet it commands a disproportionate influence over this waterway. At the narrowest point of the strait, near the Singapore Strait, global trade must squeeze through a passage barely 3 kilometers wide. And who sits right there, controlling world-class ports, refueling hubs, and naval coordination? Singapore. For Malaysia, it's like living next to a highway but not owning the road. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Strait of Malacca is classified as an international strait, meaning ships from any nation have the right of passage. Malaysia can patrol and protect its part, but it cannot claim ownership or restrict access. Every superpower from China to the United States can move freely through this corridor as long as they follow the rules. That legal reality leaves Malaysia in an awkward position, responsible for maintaining safety but unable to control what happens within its own economic artery. When something goes wrong, an oil spill, a smuggling route, or a military incident, Malaysia bears the cost, but not the control. This uneasy geography has shaped the country's destiny. Its ports thrive, yet its sovereignty over the waters remain partial. It earns from the strait, but it also depends on others to keep it secure. And that dependency has consequences. Because the Strait of Malacca may pass by Malaysia, but the power to control it drifts elsewhere. So the question isn't where the strait is, it's who truly holds the steering wheel. At first glance, the Strait of Malacca seems like a shared success, a maritime artery connecting three nations. But look closer and you'll see that not all partners share equal power. Behind the cargo ships and oil tankers lies a quiet struggle, a game of control played by neighbors and global powers alike. Let's start with Singapore, the tiniest player on the map, yet arguably the most powerful in the game. While Malaysia has the coastline, Singapore has the command center. Its ports are among the most efficient on earth, handling more containers than Port Klang and Penang combined. Every ship that enters or exits the strait passes Singapore's maritime radar network. Singapore isn't just a participant, it's the gatekeeper. With its world-class navy and advanced surveillance systems, it can monitor every vessel that slips through. It even profits from ships that don't dock there through logistics, insurance, and maritime services that funnel billions into its economy. Then comes Indonesia, stretching along the entire southern edge of the strait. Its territorial waters include much of the navigational depth that makes the route usable. Indonesia controls the alternative channels like the Sunda and Lombok Straits, giving it the leverage to redirect shipping routes if tensions ever rise. For Malaysia, that's like sharing your main road with a neighbor who also owns the detour. But the story doesn't end with Southeast Asia. Far beyond the region, superpowers have their own stakes in this narrow passage. The United States Navy patrols nearby waters to ensure freedom of navigation. China, heavily dependent on the strait for its oil imports, keeps a close eye on every movement here, calling its vulnerability the Malacca dilemma. Even India and Japan have quietly expanded their naval presence, offering training and surveillance cooperation. To manage all this tension, the four bordering nations, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand, formed the Malacca Strait Patrols, MSP. It's a joint effort to curb piracy and maintain order. But even that reveals the truth. Malaysia doesn't act alone. Because in these waters, sovereignty is shared, power is negotiated, and influence is silently traded. Malaysia may sit beside the strait, but the real control lies in the hands of those who guard it, guide it, and gain from it. And that delicate balance leads to a far deeper concern. What happens if that control ever slips away? For Malaysia, the Strait of Malacca is a blessing. But for Asia's major powers, it's also a nightmare waiting to happen. This narrow waterway may look calm on the surface, but beneath it lies one of the greatest strategic fears in the modern world, the Malacca dilemma. The phrase was first used by Chinese officials years ago, describing their biggest geopolitical weakness, that 80% of China's oil imports pass through this one strait. If anything happens here, a blockade, a war, or even an accident, China's economy could stall within weeks. But this dilemma doesn't just belong to China. Malaysia, too, lives under its shadow. Every day, the country's economy pulses to the rhythm of the ships moving through these waters, yet it has no guarantee that those ships will always come. Piracy still lurks in parts of the strait, especially closer to Indonesia's coast. One oil spill could shut down shipping lanes. A naval standoff between major powers could paralyze trade overnight, and Malaysia, sitting in the middle, would pay the highest price. That's why Malaysia quietly watches every international move with unease. When China builds ports in Myanmar or invests in the Gwadar port in Pakistan, Malaysia sees more than economic expansion. It sees a search for escape routes from Malacca. The same goes for Thailand's long-discussed Kra Canal project, which, if ever built, would bypass the Strait of Malacca entirely. For Malaysia, such projects are like slow-moving storms on the horizon. If ships began rerouting through other channels, Malaysia's ports could lose relevance and billions in revenue. The nation's lifeline could slowly become obsolete. Even within the region, shifts are happening. Indonesia is developing Sabang port near the northern entrance of the strait, hoping to become a new gateway for global trade. Meanwhile, Singapore continues to strengthen its dominance, ensuring that even if global routes shift, it stays at the center of maritime logistics. And Malaysia, it remains caught in the middle, dependent, exposed, and quietly anxious. Because if the Strait of Malacca ever stops being safe or open or necessary, Malaysia's economy could unravel faster than anyone expects. But this story doesn't end with fear, it ends with irony. Because when it comes to the Strait of Malacca, the real winners aren't always the ones sitting beside it. After centuries of trade, tension, and transformation, the Strait of Malacca still glitters as one of the world's most valuable waterways. But here's the paradox. The countries that benefit most from it aren't always the ones it runs beside. Let's start with Singapore. A nation so small you could drive across it before your coffee cools, yet it's the biggest winner of them all. While Malaysia has the coastline, Singapore built the infrastructure. Its port of Singapore consistently ranks among the top 2 busiest in the world, rivaling giants like Shanghai. But what truly sets it apart is control, not through ownership, but through efficiency and dominance. Every ship entering or leaving the Strait of Malacca inevitably interacts with Singapore, whether it's refueling, inspecting, or routing. The island nation turned geography into a business model. It became the service center of the strait, earning billions from ships that may never even touch its shores. Insurance firms, ship management companies, and maritime logistics, all headquartered in Singapore, quietly drain the profits from the very waters Malaysia depends on. Then there's Indonesia, which may seem detached, but its advantage lies in geography and leverage. Owning the southern edge of the strait, including the deeper navigational waters, gives it a natural veto over regional maritime policies. When Indonesia negotiates with superpowers or ASEAN members, the strait becomes its bargaining chip. It may not be as rich as Singapore, but its position ensures it's never ignored. Global powers, too, win big here. The United States gains strategic access for its naval patrols, projecting dominance across Asia. China keeps investing in ports and pipelines across the Indian Ocean to secure its routes. Even Japan, dependent on energy imports through Malacca, quietly funds regional security programs, all to keep the strait open and predictable. And then comes Malaysia, whose economy thrives because of this strait, yet whose control over it remains limited. It earns from port fees, logistics, and shipping, yes, but the bigger profits, the bigger power, and the bigger influence flow elsewhere. It's a painful irony. Malaysia sits beside one of the world's greatest treasures, but it's the guests, not the host, who collect most of the rewards. The Strait of Malacca built Malaysia's prosperity, but it also exposed its greatest vulnerability. But you know what I think? The biggest mistake Malaysia ever made was kicking out Singapore. Yes, Singapore was once part of Malaysia, but Malaysia pushed it out. And today, that tiny island they let go controls the very waters that Malaysia depends on. If you want to know why Malaysia kicked Singapore out, you can watch the video popping up right now titled "Why Singapore Left Malaysia." And if you are curious about what happened next, how that tiny island went from rejection to riches, then check out my other video, What Really Happened to Singapore After Malaysia Kicked It Out. Thanks for watching, mate, and thanks for hitting the subscribe button.